I am so delighted to welcome all of you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. So happy to have Onai and Denise with us, and wanted to just kick things off by sharing a couple of personal anecdotes about both Onai and Denise. I actually wrote a profile and service on Onai in 2018, and her personal story is remarkable. As a teenager, she moved alone from Zimbabwe to the UK with a single suitcase. And she ultimately graduated from university, joined the British Army as a linguist, and learned 5 languages fluently. She deployed multiple times to Afghanistan before deciding to transition to the tech sector through BreakLine. And she actually found us through another BreakLine alum, a woman named Rachel Stockton, who joined our very first cohort. I went back to reread Rachel's recommendation for Onai, and I wanted to pull out the following passage for all of you. Rachel said, "Onai is an intellectual powerhouse. She's selfless, humble, and kind. I've never met someone who has such an incredible ability to persevere and a limitless reserve of grit. I have full confidence that with BreakLine's partnership, she will join a tech company, absolutely nail it, and then become a passionate advocate for those who come after her." And I have to say that Rachel's prediction came true. Onai joined Cisco Meraki as an enterprise customer success manager in the London office. She also uses German, one of her 5 languages, and she's a passionate advocate for BreakLine, for our alums, and for our team. One indication is that she's joining us tonight from the UK, where it's almost midnight, and she's on vacation. So we're so thankful, Onai, to have you here. Onai will interview her colleague, Denise Thomas. Denise is a longtime champion of BreakLine. We first connected in 2017, shortly after BreakLine launched. Here again, our alums made all the difference. Our alum, Josh Christoph, introduced us. And since then, Denise has hosted and spoken in multiple BreakLine programs. I know you all will be so impressed by how thoughtful and insightful Denise is. And one of my favorite quotes from any speaker was something that Denise said, I think 2 years ago. She said in a BreakLine program, "Creating a fulfilling and healthy culture at work should be a top objective for every leader. At the end of the day, most people want to be seen, heard, understood, and appreciated." So Denise and Onai, what a treat to have both of you with us. Thank you so much. And Onai, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bethany, and for your very kind words as well. And Denise, it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you this afternoon. And so, Denise, to start us off, most people on the call have read your biography, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Well, thanks again for having me. I remember when Josh started chatting with me about BreakLine, and I was like, okay, well, what do we need to do to be a part of this? So I, obviously enjoy working with the organization. I think always trying to figure out how we can get more BreakLiners to Meraki and to Cisco. And so happy to be able to be a part of this conversation with you today. Let's see, what do you want to know? That's not in my bio. I was born in Jamaica. So I am an immigrant. I came by this passport a little bit of a hard way. My family moved here when my dad was an expat in Puerto Rico, so we lived there for a bit. And one day went to his job, and they had closed the factory that he had been a plant manager for. We were like, okay, my parents were like, okay, what are we going to do now? Like, we can go home, or, we can kind of think about something that we've always wanted to do. And one of the things that they had wanted to do was to move to the United States. And luckily, while my parents were there, they had gotten permanent residency, which allowed us to come to the mainland, I should say, the mainland of the United States from Puerto Rico. So I went to school in Texas growing up. So that's kind of the first. I landed from Puerto Rico into College Station, Texas, so home of the Texas A&M Aggies, where my parents went to grad school, and then we moved to Dallas, and that's kind of where I went to high school and to middle school before going to college in Connecticut. But I have 2 wonderful boys. They're 6 and 9. They keep me on my toes on a regular basis, and more so now that we are quarantined in this house together. I managed to have perfect timing. I am quarantined in the middle of a remodel. So I've been spending a lot of time with my family, but also spending a lot of time thinking about construction, which brings me to probably the third thing that you should probably know about me is that I am a builder. Like I like to build things, not houses or things like that, but I really like to build organizations. And when I look at this resume that I have, if you looked at it, you probably were like, wait, how does that make sense? And I think if I tell that story through the lens of like loving to build things, loving to turn ideas into things, loving to, really get excited about, a mission and a vision and, putting my heart into working towards those goals. So I think that's important to know about me, is that I really do like to build things. That's the best part of any job that I've ever had, is being able to be in a moment of creation and creation against mission. So those are probably some things that are not in my resume that probably shape who I am as a person.
Oh, thanks very much for the amazing answer, Denise. And now moving over to tech. So tech is a fluid industry with an average tenure of about 18 months at very many companies. However, you've been at Cisco Meraki for almost 8 years now. So what drew you here and what keeps you at the company?
Yeah, it's almost 8 years to the day. I think next month it'll be fully 8 years. And I have to say, when Meraki, I was at Meraki for 6 months before the acquisition. So when we got the news that we were being acquired, my boss at the time said to me, listen, I know you're going to quit. You like to build things. You came to work at a startup. And, that's probably not what it's going to look like when we move into sort of a larger organization. And I was like, yeah, no worries. Yeah, you're right. You understand who I am. Way to see me. And my feedback to her was like, well, you know what? This can't hurt to see through an acquisition, especially being in the people function. I could probably put that in my toolkit and then show up at another startup and say, hey, I know what that's like. I know what that exit looks like. And that can be a part of, the value that I add to a smaller company again. And needless to say, I'm still here. She's now been at multiple companies. I think she's on her 3rd company now. And I still am here. And I think the thing is, I've been fortunate that we were growing so fast that every year it felt like I was working at a different place, right? When I joined Meraki, we were just under 200 people. The acquisition took about 6 months for us to get onto the payroll. By the time we got on the payroll, we were 350 people. And then we were kind of doubling every year. And for those of you that know, about, all of you probably know about sort of what happens when you get a group of people together, what happens when you start to double the size of that group of people, all the ways that you interact and all the things that you do, those things change, and they have to change or you're not able to sort of keep up with the pace of growth. And so I don't know, it's every day I came to Meraki and every year I came to Meraki and I was like, oh, this is a whole different kind of thing than what I was dealing with before. And, you got to see $100 million and then we got to see $500 million. And now we got to see numbers I can't share with you anymore because we're too big to be able to talk about how big our company is. But I think that's what keeps me here. I think I believe fundamentally in the mission. I believe that sort of, taking powerful technology and making it something that helps unlock what other people want to do, what their life missions are. I think that's really powerful. They had me at demo when I went in on that first day because I had an experience working at a charter school, and I had this CIO sleeping under desks and trying to keep up the networks in 30 different schools in 3 different states. The minute I kind of saw the difference between being able to enable something with dashboard versus being able to enable something on the command line, I was sold because I could immediately see the value of our taking that very powerful technology, simply deploying it for our customers saving them time so that way they could actually look at technology and try to figure out how technology could enable their visions. Like I saw all the use cases. I had come from a place where that would have changed what we were able to do. The second thing is like the values resonate with me. Like, I think we're really trying to be a place that cares deeply, where people are trying to be brave, where we're trying to simplify everything, where we're trying to deploy a level of candor in kind of how we work together. And do we get it right every day? No, and that's okay. But I see folks earnestly trying to live in a way that holds our values, and that's important to me. And then the third thing I think is like, we still manage to have some fun while we do this, right? Like I spend more time on this on this communication tool that we're using that is not WebEx, but should be WebEx. I spend more time on these communication tools now than I, than I spend with my family, it feels like some days. And that's the reality of the situation. So the day it stops being fun is probably the day that I stop working there, because, I have to laugh, I have to enjoy the people that I work with, and I have to feel like, there's some joy in the thing that we're trying to do. And so those are probably the things. I fundamentally believe in the mission. I think we can change the world with this technology. I believe in the culture and the values, and I'm not because it's a finished product, but we're kind of always working on it. And then the last thing is it still brings me joy, and I wouldn't do anything if it wasn't doing that.
Great. Absolutely love the answer about the joy, fun, and the values and the culture. And I'd actually like to build a bit more about the culture of the workplace. So you posted about the importance of retaining new hires by investing on their onboarding experience. Now, why is this important?
I used to hold this, like, sometimes I'd have to sub in for my boss on the new hire day, so that way we had a commitment that we would say hello to all of our new hires from the leadership team. And I always say this. I always thank people for bringing their careers to Meraki and to Cisco. And the reason why that feels important to do is that people are taking a bet on you when they come to work for you, right? Like they're putting their time, their energy. They're sometimes they're taking pay cuts to come and work for you. They're moving to a new place to be a part of your team. And I think that employers often underestimate what a risk that is for folks to come and work with you. And, someone's like, oh, it's not risky to come and work at Cisco. And, on paper, it's not. But when somebody leaves someplace where they have established relationships, where they've built up a track record, where they know what the norms are and they can kind of operate in those norms to be successful. And they put all of that at risk to come on sort of the hope and the dream of having a successful career for you. And I think that those first 6 months really matter. So we've done some investing in Meraki around the onboarding experience. We hired someone to really think about that onboarding experience. I think we've done a good job in the first, weeks and the induction period, I would call it, sort of getting you going. I think we have some work to do on the second 6 months. What happens when you now know enough to be dangerous and you're kind of trying to drive more impact, but you haven't been someplace really long enough, right? And that's when I think it starts to get hard. So I think onboarding is important, because I think getting folks settled into this big decision that they've made is important to do. And I like our level of commitment to it. I think it's, it's a B. I would love to be able to say that we're the best company at sort of getting people settled into something new, and not quite there yet, but we're working on it.
Thanks, Denise. And so for the next question, now in the midst of free food and coffee bars at work, you wrote, what if we start demanding better cultures and stop demanding perks? Can you elaborate on this?
I should stop posting on LinkedIn snarky things is kind of what I'm noticing here. Especially since it's a part of my job is to enable that experience. So I can't talk too poorly about it, because then I might, not have a job after this chat. But seriously, I think most people would trade those things if they felt like they had a leader that really understood them and inspired them. I think most people would trade those things if they thought that they had a team around them that, you know, that was supportive and accretive to their own development. You know, I think people would give that up if they could feel like they had a culture that was truly inclusive and saw them for their whole self. Like, I think people would give up a lot in order to work in an environment that filled not only their appetite for learning and growth, but sort of their desire to feel comfortable and included. So while, I mean, I appreciate a snack, you know, at the same level than another person, just as much as the next person. I know that I would trade those things to have, you know, a work environment that truly works for me. And I think if we could drive more focus on that, then we could sort of change the experience that people have at work. And like, we've done so much to change the things they have at work, but like, I think what we've seen in the news lately is that we haven't changed the experience people are having at work, and that feels like the thing that we should be focused on, as opposed to the things. So I still feel that way, even though I make those things happen in our office. I still feel like that without focus on the other things it's performative, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Right. And I'm going to reference your LinkedIn again, where your tagline is
again.
Yeah. So your tagline is thinking about teams. And in addition, you previously pointed to a McKinsey research report on CEOs of talent-driven companies that said, leaders at talent-driven companies are as focused on talent as they are on strategy and finance. They make talent considerations an integral part of every major strategic decision, and they empower teams to unleash the talent that will drive outsized value. Now, why did that quote resonate with you?
Well, I can't remember where I read it somewhere, but they were like, you know, you can give a good team a mediocre idea and they turn it into a great one. But if you give a mediocre team a great idea, like, there's no real guaranteed level of success there. Like, and I think that is true. I have seen in the past teams that are truly functioning as, you know, best in class teams, like collaborating effectively, having each other's back, really, you know, leaning on the strengths of each of the team members in order to get to outcome, clarity of outcome, focus, you know, like doing amazing things beyond what, you know, anyone would have thought was possible, right? And then I've seen teams that are like highly resourced and not able to get to outcome. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to think about like how to have perpetual growth in an organization. And I think like the only way that you have that is that you have to have teams that are capable of perpetual growth. And there's no reason you can't have a company that is successful, a multi-generational success. And if you find those companies, my guess is what you have is like a company that has been really thoughtful about teams, like how people work together, how they organize their work, how they're rewarded, and, you know, and how they are inspired and the clarity of their vision and direction. And like, I would put money on that. And when I see failures and when we trace failures back, whether it's a failure of, you know, education or a failure of government or a failure of business, I think sitting at the foot of that failure is a failure of a team, never a failure of an individual. I think a failure of a team. And I don't know, like, I think we have enough science out there around what makes effective teams. And if we just did what the science suggested, and I know it's hard because as a leader, I sit there and look at myself all the time and say, oh, that was not, you know, you could have done better there, and you could have done better there. And how's this person experiencing you? And how can you change that? Like, I'm doing that every day. But like, if we could get it right at that unit that matters in a business or it's government or in a, you know, in the education environment, that unit that matters most to me is at the team. When you get that right, I think you can satisfy the desires of individuals and you can actually do better work.
Great, thanks very much for that. And the last question, which I'll draw on your LinkedIn profile, I promise. So you recently shared a quote from Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation. And the quote reads, "Only when companies and management are accountable in ways that are quantifiable will we see real systematic transformation of corporate America." Now, in your opinion, what are the best tools or approaches for holding companies and leaders accountable in this regard? And which companies are currently best in class in this area?
We have been very fortunate at Cisco. Our leadership team has really wanted to sort of sit in this conversation around corporate responsibility and kind of what, you know, a company can do to affect change in the world and in our communities and in our businesses. And we have been really fortunate to be able to hear from Darren in person and to hear him talk about the systems that sometimes make it difficult for folks to be able to be their best, and the systems that sometimes make it impossible for them to do that. And I think that is at the heart of, you know, what we're thinking about at Cisco is, you know, how can we be a part and how can we be focused on, you know, how technology can make a more inclusive world? Like, we had a mission before, we have a new mission now, and we're really on mission, on purpose, where that is concerned. So when you ask the question, like, you know, well, what companies are doing it, like what, you know, how to like drive accountability on this? I mean, I'm no expert in inclusion. There are other people that are probably experts on that. But I do think that you have to start with a data-driven approach. I think you have to kind of look out at the data within your company and say, well, what's actually happening? And rather than taking just anecdotal information, you sort of hear the stories and then you look at the data. Like, what do people say is happening? What is actually happening? So I think companies that are better at creating an inclusive culture are companies that really think about the data and how the data can tell the story of what's actually, like, how people are really experiencing the culture of an organization. I think that companies have to be a part of dismantling the systems that drive racism, sexism, homophobia, all of the ways that society disenfranchises members every day. And I think they have to be purposeful in being a part of that solution. And I think that's like a little bit of an evolution on my part, because I think that up until now I have said, hey, and I think I said this in February, so now I'm eating my words pretty quickly after saying them. Like, I can't control what happens outside the door at Meraki. Like, I used to say, I can't control what happens outside the door at Cisco. Like, I can't. What I can do is try to create an environment here that's far more equitable and, you know, far more data focused, and is really thinking about, you know, building teams that are more diverse and more effective for our business. That out there I can't change. This in here I can. And the reality of that situation is that that's a little bit of a fool's errand, right? Because there are people coming in the building and, you know, they have an experience out in the world, and they're bringing that experience and the bias and all that stuff that comes along with it. And that experience is having an influence on the decisions that they're making in our business. That experience is having an impact on how they carry our culture. Those decisions that they're making and how they're showing up for work are fundamentally tied to the systems at play in the society outside of our building. And I'm excited for what we're doing at Cisco, because I think we're saying we understand that, and we're going to go try to be a part of the solutioning that happens out in the world, because we know we can't have the type of team that we want to have here without being a part of that. So I do think that that's an integral part of like companies' approach to inclusion nowadays, is that they got to think that they're part of solutioning outside the walls, because the reality of it is that everybody that walks into the building walked in from outside those walls, right? So I think being data-driven, being, engaged with solving and dismantling the systems that allow people to not be effective is important, both inside and outside their organizations. I think there has to be a focus on, on equity, really looking across the organization and making sure that what you're trying to do is have, an equitable experience for folks. So if, what we know is that, people, tend to, mentor and sponsor folks that like they have something in common with. Well, how do we create a system within an organization to break that natural inclination and give folks an opportunity to have access to leadership that can mentor or sponsor them? Like, you got to think about that stuff systematically. And then the last thing I would say is you have to treat this like any other business imperative. Like, if what we know is that more diverse teams drive better outcomes for the business, it's like the data has proven that already. Like, we don't have to go back and try to prove that point anymore. And then if you look at your team and your team is not representative of the talent that is out in the world, here's what I do know. That like, if your goal is to build a best team and your team isn't diverse, chances are there's some amazing talent that could have been a best team for you that is not sitting at your table today. So I think like that piece of it has to be in focus. You have to sort of say, well, how is this leader moving in a way that their teams are getting more diverse and inclusive? How is this leader helping to grow careers equitably across the board in their organization? And then I think you gotta hold people accountable to it in a way that you hold them accountable to all of the other business results that they have. And usually that comes in the form of money. So it's a little bit of an unpopular view, but I do think that like as a leader, I should be able to take a look at the results that you have and include inclusion as a part of my business results, and sort of have, reward folks that are able to show up with everything that I'm asking for in order to make my business better. And it's not additive, it's not an extra, you don't get extra credit for it. You get credit for doing the right things by my business, and the right thing by my business is to build an inclusive team. So I'm not giving you extra credit. That's like a part of doing your job. And, folks should be rewarded for doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, they shouldn't be rewarded. Like, it is what it is. But like, if we don't treat it like a business outcome, it gets treated like a business outcome. It gets treated by not being a business outcome. And I think that is what we have seen in the world today. That was a very long way to answer your question. But I think the second part of it is like, who's doing well? No one's doing well, like 0 items. If somebody was doing well, we could look and, the board of directors of that Fortune 500 company would reflect, the country that they're in or the community that they're in. Nowhere is that true. You would look and you would see the senior leadership of that organization, and it would be a diverse slate of folks really trying to think through the diverse customer base that they have, and being able to bring those experiences to the table. No one has that. So, you have a dearth of, female executives, far underrepresented, especially in comparison to like what they represent in sort of the female population at work. You have a dearth of, underrepresented communities in boardrooms and in the C-suite. And so, again, I'm not looking at the talk, I'm looking at the outcomes. And so the outcomes makes me say, no one's good at this. So, sorry, no one's good at this. But what I do see is I see companies really putting an effort and not giving it lip service, but really putting an effort on doing the hard work to make their companies and our cultures and our societies more equitable.
No, thanks very much for your candor, Denise. We've got lots of questions rushing in from our audience, so I'm going to ask you one last question before we move on to those. So the last few months have been challenging for leaders, first dealing with the COVID pandemic, and then addressing the Black Lives Matter movement, which has affected so many people in the US and globally. In addition to this, we're in the middle of a recession, which has seen over 13 million Americans lose their jobs. Now, all this has had an impact on employees within Cisco and Meraki itself, and we've had many conversations around making long-standing changes for the better. Now, for yourself as a leader in tech during these turbulent times, what has been your biggest challenge and how have you dealt with it?
For the business, I would say our biggest challenge is the health and the welfare of our employees, right? Like you just listed out a lot of things. Any one of those things would have been challenging for folks to consume, especially as they're kind of trying to grow our business. And we have had, and this is not localized, we've had a global experience. We say we live in a connected world. The last 3 months has helped us really understand how connected our world is, right? And I think that has been the part that we've had to navigate, that has been like the hardest thing to navigate, right? This has been hard. And as a leader, like trying to think about how to support folks on your team when there's just so many factors out of everyone's control, and how to be flexible and you know, how to provide folks the things that they need in order to navigate these challenges that are in their lives and the challenges that people are feeling in our business. I think that has been the hardest part of it. You know, feel like, oh, a business and sales are down, and I'm like, you know, it will pass, and then we will have another economic cycle like we've had other economic cycles. Like we have had a break in society, and we've shared that break in society globally, and that is really different than sort of a shift in an economic cycle. So I think trying to care for our employees in a way that meets them where their needs are has been the hardest part of this. So yeah, and then I think for me personally, like it felt like a lot. Like I got a new job in the last 3 months. I've had like, you know, working in this new way. I'm used to like working in person with folks. I'm an introvert, so this like all day long on the Zoom, like I crawl into bed every night, like feeling like I've been run over by a car. I have also sort of like, I have felt like, you know, I've spent like, I have 20 plus years working. It's been more than that, but that makes me feel good just to say that. So 20 plus years working, and I feel like I've navigated work in a very particular way, right? I have chameleoned my way through life. So you need me to be like this? Oh, I can be like that. You need me to not have an accent? Look at this. I don't have an accent. Grew up in Texas, born in Jamaica. Look at this. You know, I could be a Midwestern TV personality. Like I have done all of the navigating, and as a friend of mine likes to say, I have been hiding in plain sight. And I think this moment, it has been really difficult to keep that up. Like, I'm like, oh, here's the way that I would typically navigate this situation. I pretend it doesn't matter. And I'm like, it kind of matters. And I'm like, I spent a week not being on like WebEx because I didn't know when I was going to cry in the middle of a meeting, and I couldn't necessarily be in a meeting being like, I'm crying right now in a meeting, and you're asking me about something, and I'm having a full-on emotional breakdown. Like, that has like never happened before. And I think and I've like had conversations about race and how I felt about it with my manager. These are things that have never happened before. I have effectively been very good at hiding in plain sight. And I think that has felt really hard, like a new level of vulnerability at work, a new level of vulnerability with my family, a new level of vulnerability with my kids, like everybody's going through this thing together. And And I think it has been personally really hard to sort of say, navigating work as a Black woman has been hard. And like those words coming out of my mouth, like not in a way that's like, yeah, it's hard, you know, and here's kind of the coping mechanisms that we can deploy in order to make it work and get to where we want to get to. But like really having conversations about how hard it has been has felt really different. And it has required me to show up in a very different way for my colleagues and for my team and for other people at the organization that maybe share some of the experiences that I've had at work. So it has felt it has felt hard on multiple fronts. I feel like it felt hard because I'm trying to like help navigate an organization through this moment. And then it's felt hard personally because the way that I have navigated corporate life feels no longer available. And it also feels no longer right. Like if I can't show up and say, here's the full story, and I can't be a part of really helping people understand what the problem is, then it is unlikely that the solutioning that I'm going to get is going to match the problem. So I think it has felt difficult because I have had to rethink who I am at work and what effectiveness looks like at work. And it has become far more personal than I have ever felt comfortable with. So I have felt exposed, for lack of better words, on multiple fronts in the last few months.
Yeah, thank you very much for answering that, Denise, and for answering all my questions this evening.
Bad allergies too, sorry.
I definitely get bad allergies. So I was going to move on to some of the questions we've got from the audience. So the first one is from Ron, who asks, what are some of the unique solutions that you and your team have deployed to minimize discomfort and maximize happiness during this time?
Well, there's a member of my team that works on thinking about this for the organization. And I think one of my best moments that I've had so far in working in this way is that she put on, I can't remember what we called it, like Meraki After Hours or Meraki Unplugged or something like that. And people showed up with whatever talents they had. Onai, I don't know if you went to this, but like they showed up with like whatever talents they had. And like, it was just so amazing. Like folks showed up with their kids and they sang duets with their kids and their spouses, and people played guitar, and they just connected in a way that felt so, like, just really felt so great. Like we just got to see each other doing the things that we love. And it just felt so great to be a part of a community that A, would be willing to do that, but like that B, just had so much talent and so much personality. And that like, I have felt like in the last 3 months, like we have just done more connecting that feels real. I mean, we have like now happy hours with Chris's leadership team. So my boss, like, I didn't know that much about my coworkers, and I've worked with them for 8 years. Like, that's crazy. And so like now we're in each other's homes, whether we like it or not. Like our kids are popping in the screen. I'm surprised that we haven't had any visitors today. Like, I think we've connected in some organized ways. I think the thing that has been most powerful is just getting to know more about people, because I think we're laid bare in this experience. Like no one's hiding anymore. I've seen people's pets, their kids. I've learned about things about them that I would never have learned about before. So some of it hasn't been anything we've organized. Some of it has just been in these small moments where we've had a depth of connection that is different than it was before.
Great. And building on the theme about culture, we've got a question from Eric Gonzalez, who's asked, how have you managed and sustained company culture from a tech startup through acquisition by a major tech company? What have you learned?
I have learned that you can't chase sustaining a culture. That is what I have learned. Like, your culture is in service to your business and is in service to your people. And it's not going to be the same when you're like 100 people and you all know each other, and you share information in a particular way, and the strength of your organization is based on sort of the direct connection that people have to each other. You get to 500 people, you got to change that. You got to think about well, what is it that my customers and my employees need in order to be successful at this point? What is the culture that will allow that to happen? And then you look at it again, and you look at it again. And there's some tenets in it that I think have been with us along that journey, like this desire to care for each other, and to feel like what we are is in community with each other as we do this work. I can see that threaded all the way through, but what that community looks like and what that community believes and what that community rewards and all that stuff that you determines what your culture is, that has changed over time. So I don't know. I think it's like an organism. It's like, for those of you that bake bread, it's like starter, and you kind of have to keep feeding it. And it kind of you got to keep feeding it, and you got to keep watching it, and you got to keep nurturing it. And it's not always going to be, and it can't be the same, because your business isn't the same. The employees that you're attracting are not the same. And if it doesn't grow and evolve with you, it can kill you if you try to hold on to what it used to be.
Thank you. And the next question is from Jeremy Vayan, who asks, could you please speak to your transition from running people operations to running business operations? It seems like a non-traditional yet exciting path.
I was like, Jeremy, did you see the rest of my resume? Did any of the other things make sense to you? I'm like, oh. This one feels like makes more sense to me than the other ones. I started my work life in operations, and so it almost feels like coming home. Like, we were talking the other day about loading a truck, and I was like, oh yeah, are we gonna cube it out? And everyone's like, and I'm like, yeah, I used to do these things. I used to help companies forecast demand. I used to work in product operations. I used to do these things, and it feels a little bit like coming home in a really weird way, but coming home with a whole other set of skills that can be deployed against building, operational excellence and the foundational layer within an organization to keep it innovating. I think all of those stops along the way help make this feel like the right next move. So to me, it feels like I've always been doing that. I spent some time in operations. I spent some time running this financial group within an operations team. I spent some time being a merchant at TJX, which is basically one big supply chain project. How do you get goods to the right stores and I spent some time trying to help people think about how do you get folks to be at their best? What systems do you have to bring and break in order to do that? I ran facilities and before as a part of my job at Meraki, and it starts to come together in a really great way. And I think it's aligned with what I want out of my career. One day I want to be able to lead something, and this gets me a little bit closer to that.
Great, Denise. And our next question is from Raphael, who asks, can you share a time when you helped a struggling teammate reach their own full potential? And how did you notice their hidden talents?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, I have this really great example. I remember walking into my boss's office. I think this was at Long, and we were, hiring a couple analysts or something on my team, and I was like, oh, there's a person that works at the company that was in our department, so everybody knew her. And I was like, oh, this person is going to be on the team. And my boss was like, who? And I was like, oh yeah, this person totally going to be on the team. And I remember she was just so perplexed by the decision. And I don't know, like, I think what I always try to do is focus on what I think the skills are for something. And then I try to focus on like how, you know, whether or not I can kind of see that skill set in someone. And then I try to help them turn what I see are a set of skills against the requirements for the role. I have been fortunate to be able to have that experience myself, where folks are like, no, you've never done that before, but here's some skills that I see that are needed over here, and here's kind of how we can kind of get you ready for that role. And I've tried to do a similar thing with some folks that work on my team, where folks will be like, they used to do what, and now they do this, and I go, yeah, because it's like, here are these skills, and if we can take those skills and then give folks some training at work on how to deploy those skills in this new way, then it's I think it's easier to do that than to try to like roam the world all day long looking for unicorns. I think you can create unicorns within your own organization by just being clear around the types of skills that you want. I think, Onai, your boss, Jorge, says it well. He's like, in order to be effective in the support organization, you innately have to have a customer orientation. I can't teach you that. I can teach you how to understand networking, and I can teach you these technical items. That is within grasp of most people from an intellect perspective, but that core belief in, you know, customer service, I can't teach you. And if you have that, I can teach you all these other things, and we can have a different type of career. But I feel the same way around talent and talent development, is that you can, if you know what you're looking for and you know what's core, then you can kind of develop the other stuff. I don't know if that was a great answer to your question.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. And I actually have a follow-up from that answer you gave. So Jaya asks, true leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. We're having a digital transformation at the moment. How do you cultivate leaders virtually during a pandemic?
I don't know. Yeah, we've been thinking about that too. I think we continue to, I'm going to fall back on the answer that I have. I think we continue to look at the data. You know, before we were like, oh, we're going to go out and do all this leadership training and this and the other, blah, blah, blah. We ran a pulse recently within the organization to ask, like, well, what do you think you need in order to be successful in this new working environment? And people could sort of write in the things that they needed. And then we took that data and we said, okay, well, what would we need to help our leaders be enabled to do that, right? And so our learning and our leadership team came up, our leader learning team came up with, you know, a set of competencies that they say like are needed by leaders to navigate, you know, the type of uncertainty that we're in, both from a business context and kind of like helping sort of, you know, the employee experience in this moment. And then they started to just sort of send out, like, they started a drip campaign and sort of saying, here are some things that you should think about, like, how do you deal with ambiguity in a moment where there's just a lot of uncertainty? How do you drive focus for your teams? Like, how do you set goals, and how do you do OKRs and stuff like that? Like, really trying to think, you know, what type of leader can lead in a moment like this, and then almost taking a step back and saying, okay, well, what would you need to know in order to be ready for that? And then providing people with like a set of some guidelines on kind of how to like educate themselves. So there's a learning path that's coming out where folks can kind of learn some of the skill sets. So I think that's like the way that we have approached it, but it's hard. we've gotten so used to like leading by small moments and examples. Oh, I saw you do that in a meeting, I want to do the same. And now we have to be far more purposeful about it, which I hope when we come out of this thing, there's like this quote out there from Brene Brown where she is like, I hope we bring all this vulnerability, this agility, and all of this stuff that we learned in this moment, and we make that the new normal, and we don't like retreat back into like the old ways that we used to develop leaders and think about it. Like we change what leadership looks like because we have had to lead everywhere in this new way. So yeah, we asked people what they thought they needed. We built some learning around that in order to support our leaders to be able to better support our employees. We're kind of slowly rolling that out. And that's kind of how we've approached it.
I mean, that's a really great point about taking forward all the lessons that we've learned during these turbulent times. Thank you very much for that. The next question is from John Kang, who asks, as a leader, you're being really thoughtful about taking care of your team during this difficult time. What do you do to take care of yourself and prioritize self-care?
I have felt more consumed by my own well-being the last 3 months. If you go talk to my team, I don't know how much they'd be like, oh, she's been so taking care of us, you know, especially in the last month or so. Because I think I got to a point where I was like, I can't, I'm having a moment. Someone needs to take care of me. And I think I have been trying to be like more disciplined around the thing that I think has driven the most sanity during this time, which is like just going outside, in, you know, like just taking a walk in the middle of the day, getting up and try to like drive the gratitude that we're all like in our house, we're safe and we're healthy, but also just trying to say, well, what's good about this moment? Oh, what's good about this moment is I sometimes get up and I find my husband at the dining room table and we have lunch together. Like, never would have happened. Like, I couldn't even call him in the middle of the day and have him call me back. Like, I was always like, if I'm dead on the side of the road, he's not coming because he's not gonna know. So like, I think I've tried to be purposeful of taking care of myself, which is something that was never ever on the top of my list, but it has felt important to be on the top of my list today. And then I've tried to just focus on what good is happening in my life because of this. I'm getting to spend far more time with my children than I ever have. And the reality of the situation is like, I'm like, that's far more interesting than I thought. Like, we're having a good time. Like, we're really trying to enjoy ourselves as much as they drive me a little nutsy. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to focus on that I got back time with my family, and now I have a new expectation of how we spend our time together. And I am trying to do that. I'm still terrible at sleeping at night. I'm still terrible at all those things, but I think what I have also learned is to try to be less hard on myself, because that sport is so detrimental in a moment like this.
No, thank you very much for being very honest with the answer there. And I'm going to move on to one final question before we wrap up. And this is from Chandler Williams, who asks, what do you think is the #1 factor for employee retention and high performance?
I mean, I guess my guess is that it's twofold. Sorry, you said #1. I'm not good at following directions. I would say it's twofold. I think it has to be that somebody believes in the leader that they have. I have not ever retained anyone on my team that did not believe in me as a leader. Like, if you don't believe in me as a leader, you are not going to stay. Like, and I also, know that I try to be the leader that everybody needs, but I'm not always going to be the leader that works for everyone. And I think that's a hard lesson to come by when you are growing as a leader. You don't want to be a leader that works for nobody. That would be bad. But the truth is that you're unlikely to be a leader that works for everyone. And that's important to know. So I think it matters, the leader, from a retention perspective. Do you have someone who's, you know, who you feel compelled by, and that feels invested in you? I think that leadership equation matters. And people will leave really great opportunities if the leader isn't the right leader for them. And I think responsible companies understand talent and are able to better match talent with leaders, and responsible leaders are able to sort of stretch themselves to be able to meet most of the talent. But that leader thing is important. And then I think the other thing is, like, the company thing is important. Like, the culture in an organization is a tool for retention. I like it when people say it's hard to leave Meraki. I'm like, good, and the culture's working, right? Like, it should, like, you should feel like, oh, I gotta stay. So I think those two things feel important. Having a leader that really resonates with you and how you want to be led, and then having a culture that feels sticky. Those are the things that I would say probably determines whether or not someone stays or goes.
Onai and Denise, I'll jump in now, and I'm supposed to wrap up, but Denise, I'm wondering if you'll allow for one lightning round. We had a question just come in from Taj, and he says, Queen Denise, you are superhuman.
No.
You have accomplished.
Taj, let me get my kids in here.
Can you wave at Denise so she can see you? Taj has the headphones on. He says, you've accomplished so many things. What setbacks, failures did you overcome that stand out in your mind?
Oh my gosh, so many. Most recently, when I was Todd's chief of staff, I used to joke that all of my work was basically stuff nobody wanted to do, and everyone was going to hate me for it. Like, it just was like a list of, I was like, did you like wake up in the morning and say, what's all the stuff that Meraki doesn't want to do? And then say, oh, just bottle that up and give it to Denise and make it her job. And one of the things that I was asked to do is to take a team that had been, you know, distributed across the organization and bring it into and centralize the team. And it's just not one of the ways that we had worked in the past. We had given leaders the opportunity to grow, you know, these like mini functions within a function. And the reality of the situation is that we weren't sort of getting scale out of that function as a result. We didn't, you know, like folks didn't have, you know, a leader that had some functional expertise that could help guide and grow them. Like on, you know, like on a business case paper, it was just like, yeah, why not? Like, yeah, sure. Like everybody could see that this was a good idea. And I knew I was walking into a cultural storm, and it was a disaster. Like we had a goal of retaining like 80% of the critical talent. I think like we were retaining like 20%. Like there's like all of the metrics of success that I had like put down, like when I started to do this thing, like none, like barely met. We have a structure now that is the one that we needed to land in, and I think we're seeing the benefits of that structure, but the journey that I took the organization on in order to get there was so flawed. And some of it was just like, I have a fatal flaw around, you know, how I want to move, and it's like, there's a bus, get on it. And like I was dismantling something that people built, you know, with their blood, sweat, and tears, and they put a lot of time into it, and I didn't take that into consideration. And the organization lost some really great talent as a result of that. And I think about that all the time now when I'm talking to my team, and they're like, well, this, that, and the other, and I'm like, if I tell you you're right, you're going to do the wrong thing. So I'm going to tell you that the thing that you need to do is go get people to come along with you. And it's a lesson hard learned. I blew up an organization that were like 20% attrition in these teams. Like some teams almost 80%. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot in that mistake.
Thank you, Denise. And Onai and Denise, what a special hour to spend with both of you. Onai, you're such an amazing example of our brilliant BreakLine community. And Denise, every time you speak, it's just, I just find you so thoughtful, sincere, and grounded. And I want to thank you for being real with us over the last
As
hour.
I like start everywhere.
I'll cry with you. We all will. We so appreciate your time. We so appreciate your insights that you shared with us and your reflections. So thank you so much, Denise. Thanks so much to the BreakLine community for showing up tonight, to Casey for leading the charge, and Onai and Denise, to both of you for spending your time with us. Really appreciate it.